Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, 5011 fam. I was about to do that. Yes. Doo-doo. Period. It's Didi and Jay with the 5011 Chronicles, doing what we do, having conversations that spark conversation. And this is the long awaited episode about X-Men 97, y'all. 5011 reviews. We're about to get into it. So
Yeah.
thank you for tuning in for another episode of the 5011 Chronicles. OMG. X-Men 97.
X-Men
Literally
97's the
X-Men
best.
97. Like, there's so many words. There's so many words that could be said about the show. There's so many things. And the first thing, before we even get into the show itself, I mean, I have to say something. I have to make a claim. This is your spoiler alert, first of all. The show's been over for about 2-3
You had
weeks.
so much time.
You've had time. You've had time. It's only 10 episodes. Each is only about 30 to 43 minutes per. So, period. You've had time. I am going to go out on a limb and say something a little wild, maybe in some people's opinion. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. I think that this might be the best production we've seen from Marvel to date.
Agreed.
I think even for
The
an
excitement's
animation,
back. It was great writing. It was great voice acting. It was
what
great animation. It was just
everything. And I think even for, like, it's hard to create content that is going to connect an audience that's been with something forever and going to bring in a new audience, and they managed to do it. They managed to bring a
with such
fresh
a
take.
time difference. It's been over 20 years.
What? It's been,
So
yeah, almost 30. Like,
yeah.
that's what's crazy. It's literally been almost 30 years
As
since
old
the
as it.
show. It's been over 30 years since the show started. So, X-Men 97. I mean, the first thing that we have to talk about clearly before we get into the actual, like, content of the actual plot itself, is they managed to keep the feel of the original, but still an
Mm-hmm.
updated take. I don't know if you ever saw X-Men Evolution, but it
Yes.
felt like X-Men Evolution plus X-Men, the animated series, as far as graphics, and just brought to 2024. Because
Yes.
they still had that kind of fresh look, but it was still pretty true to the
Mm-hmm.
original series. Costuming, they tightened everything up. Colors were great.
Yes.
Skin
Everybody was
tones,
nice and lean and
you
fit.
know, fit but not hypersexualized.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Storm was chocolate.
Chocolates. We got
Chocolate.
67 different looks from Storm.
Every
All
look,
iconic.
every look from the lookbook. Like, I mean, they really, and I even liked the idea of them making Morph have this version or this form where they were literally kind of gray. They were just kind of in between everything. They were, because now Morph is non-binary. Representation was really big here, and they managed to get it right. Like, Nightcrawler having the authentic German
Mm-hmm.
accent and it
Yes.
being real and thick and like,
Yes.
it was nice. Storm's accent not being exactly African just yet, like
Kind
not
of
purely
remind myself
Nigerian
of like how long she was like in America
in
too.
America. So it's like
So
yeah,
yeah.
so that has to be. I like
To
that you
be
did that.
fair.
To be fair, she has been in America at that point 10, 20 years. So,
Yeah.
that's, I agree. Like, but even Storm, the representation of the character Storm, I feel like they
Mhm.
got it right this season.
And
Like,
the essence of what she really represents on the team,
on the
they got
team, but
right.
also globally, like the energy that is Storm, like, we're going to get into it, but the recognition,
Mhm.
like, I think so many times before in the comics, in the shows, she's been downplayed. She's been made to seem weak. We're going to get into Jean Grey as well. They managed to take each character and give them a moment, but they also took those characters who always have the moment and reeled them back some. Like,
Yeah.
Wolverine was not the star of X-Men 97. And I think that was a wonderful decision. That was one of the
And
best
you know
decisions they
what?
could have
I
made.
think that was a part of it too, is like because X-Men wasn't with Marvel for so long, and
Mm-hmm.
the content that we were getting was so below average.
Mm-hmm.
Is the nicest way I can.
Right. Subpar. Mm-hmm.
X2 was. I love X2. I'm not gonna lie. I
X2 is
really like
good.
X2. But outside of that, like just the way they did the stories, it's like they did what they always do to all the stories, and they put
Mm-hmm.
it in their lens the way they want it to fit their audience. And y'all know who they is.
Right.
We ain't even
Mm-hmm.
got to say it.
Ain't even gonna say it.
Ain't even gotta say it. That's why Storm been child from America rooted since the whole time they had her. It wasn't no
Mm-hmm.
Africa in her. Okay? Not a piece.
Not a
And so
piece.
I think that a part of what made it feel so good is like we got a good X-Men again, finally. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a true to X-Men. And
It's
it
true to X-Men.
has every piece of what made X-Men great in it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we have been missing it for so long. So it's
So
like you have the
long.
nostalgia, you have the expectations being met because we
Mm-hmm.
had went so long without
Exceeded.
good quality.
I'll go so far as
Exceeded.
to say exceeded. I'll say exceeded.
Exceeded. Because you don't see times where something comes back and it tops what was previously done.
Yes.
You don't
Very
see
that. Very
and
that.
they did that. And
They
that's
did
not
it.
easy to do. Like you gotta
They
give
did
them their
it.
props. They did that.
It's like you said, it's rare that a show, movie, anything comes back 20, 30 years later in a reboot or a continuation, and it's
And
just as good
every
as the original,
single part of
if
it is
not better.
better.
And this was better. This was,
I
like you
feel
said,
like every part of it.
every part of it was better. I completely agree. So let's get into super quick rundown of what happened at the end of X-Men, the animated series, which is what leads to the beginning of this. Because the
Yes.
last thing that we would remember from 1996, people, those who were there, Dee claimed she wasn't.
Child, I wasn't there, but I had watched
I
like kind
watched,
of like the moon landing. I wasn't there, but I had
wasn't there,
watched
but I
that
seen it. I done seen it. So
anyway,
I remember watching, I think I started watching X-Men the animated series around 96, 97, because
yeah.
the reruns were definitely happening 97. And my earliest memories are from ages 3 and 4. And I
Hmm.
remember watching
Yeah.
X-Men on TV, but
Hmm.
it was after the show was
Hmm.
like on. It wasn't the beginning. Cause
Yeah.
I
Because I
was
think
born in
X Men
93.
Evolution was more us like
We were
coming out. Yeah.
definitely remember X-Men Evolution. Love that. And, what was the show? Spike? With Spike, what was that called? Do you remember the one with Spike? They had the whole show about Storm. They called him Storm's nephew, but the guy who had the Spike's powers and it was he was black and
No, I never saw it.
they had a whole show. They had a whole show. Spike had a whole moment. Or maybe Spike was on X-Men Evolution. I might have just made that up, but I was
I'm
mixing that
just,
with Static
I've
Shock
never seen that show.
because I was
Static
totally
Shock though
mixing that
was
with
lit.
Static Shock. That's what just happened. Okay. All
Because
right,
I'm like,
Jay.
what?
Reel it back in. Reel it
What?
back in, Jay. Okay. Had a whole moment. I mixed Spike from X-Men Evolution with Static Shock because I think Spike was a character in Evolution that was Storm's nephew. I think they had a whole moment like that. But okay, neither here nor there. But the last thing we remember from X-Men the animated series is Professor X was seriously harmed by Henry Gyrick. They thought he was dead. And Liliandra and the Shi'ar Empire came and snatched him up and was like, we're going to do everything we can to save him. We're going to save him. And so he ascended essentially. He was gone. He went with the aliens off. And so the X-Men were left without their leader. The founder of the X-Men, the founder of the mansion, the founder of the academy was gone. And
On top of
so
the chaos that was
on
going on.
top of the chaos, because also at this time we've got the major movements in the anti-mutant movement.
Mm-hmm.
The Friends of Humanity are being founded and being started and getting their thing going. And you've got Sentinels. Sentinels are particularly these machines that they're just particularly to target mutants. Because what people must realize about the history of X-Men, the comic and the animated series, and the movies, because every time X-Men, an iteration has come about, it has been about representation of a marginalized community.
Mm-hmm.
The comic X-Men was about Black people.
Mm-hmm.
You had Charles Xavier representing Martin Luther King Jr., and you had Magneto representing Malcolm X, and the differences in opinion on the same issue with the same level of passion.
This is not us making it about
This is not
race.
us making
These
it
are
up, and it's not a
facts.
conspiracy theory. This is legit. Stan Lee and Chris
Yes.
Claremont and all the people. I can't remember the other guy's name, and I feel really bad in this moment because it's
I
going to
think
come to
it's on
me.
Disney too. On those, you know how they
These
talk
little
about.
clips, the little
Yeah,
behind the
I
scene,
think
the
they talk about it
history.
on
They do
one of
talk about it, and it's like this is like a fact. So this is a fact about the show and the comics and everything. So the comics were particularly set up to represent the civil rights movement.
those.
The movies were happening during the time of the LGBT rights movement. So the movie characters, you'll notice nuances in the original X-Men with Iceman and with Bobby Drake Iceman, with Rogue and certain characters, you'll notice that there are some undertones of the LGBTQ community movement. So the show has always been about representation. The content of X-Men has always been about we are different than y'all and y'all treat us some kind of way. And there are those of us who want to exist peacefully, and there are those of us who are like, F y'all, we finna do what we gotta do to get our own, to get our rights. We're superior, and it is what it is. And I think it's beautiful and it's always relevant. X-Men is always relevant, which is why I feel like the community is always so pushing so hard for X-Men to get their just due, because the story, the idea, everyone is represented in the X-Men. There's not a community that's not represented
Yeah.
in the X-Men. And now with the and I don't want to say the invention because I feel like that's the wrong word, but with the better understanding of the idea of people being non-binary and the fluidity of gender, having a character that is non-binary was vital for a show like this because it's always been content about representation, and they did it. So that's the history of X-Men. Now we've talked about Xavier was not doing well. They done flew him off to the place, and that's how the show
He got
ended. You
flued
got
out
all this turmoil.
by his little girlfriend.
We're gonna get into it. So all of this turmoil is going on, and this show starts about a year after Xavier has left the planet. And we start with the story of the X-Men essentially had told the world Charles Xavier was dead. And this was the best way to keep attention off of the X-Men, to not have a target on their back, to not have a target on him, to not have a target on the Academy, and to kind of lay low while they figure
Yeah.
out next moves and situations. And so, de facto leader, Cyclops, stepping up, trying to do his thing, running missions. He's like, we're going to figure this thing out. We finna deal with the anti-mutant folk. We finna do it. I'm finna lead. That's what I've been destined to do. And they do a mission, and it's a little rocky and it's a little rough, but you know, they're getting their bearings. They're getting adjusted to not having Xavier. And what's wonderful about this episode is the way that it ends is there's a quote that Professor Xavier always used when he called the X-Men telepathically, out loud, but he always said, to me, my X-Men. Cyclops got his chance to utter it in this episode. To me, my X-Men. But the way that the show ends is with Magneto being like, what was left to me from Professor Xavier, you know, was this house, everything. So essentially, this all belongs to me, my X-Men. So Magneto has always been their villain.
Yeah.
But in the origin of his relationship with Charles, we begin to realize and see so much more about how they started hand in hand, side by side on this mission. And we've seen it in some of the movies.
Can we just talk about for a second how unfair it is that Magneto has always been painted as their villain? Like, they've literally just volunteered him as their villain. When the whole time, everything he's fighting for is for them. He's just not doing it the way they feel like he should be doing it. Now, don't get me wrong, Magneto we know.
He's OP, first of all.
We know.
And he's
But he
Omega
didn't get
level,
there.
and sometimes
He
he
didn't
be a
get
little
there for no
unhinged.
reason. And he don't be out here just starting stuff. He be finishing stuff.
That's true.
And because he's
I
Omega
definitely give you
level,
that.
he's always going to finish it. And that's why he
Always.
gets painted as the villain. But it's like, it's crazy too how, like, even in X-Men in general, they feel like Magneto is more of a villain to them than the humans. When you're in danger from these people, I'm trying to help y'all. Y'all just don't like how I'm helping y'all. But I'm on your side, essentially.
Essentially, they should be.
You just keep trying to harm me because you've decided that I'm your villain. Like, you've decided in your mind. And really, because Professor X decided in his mind. So y'all just doing whatever he's telling y'all to do. Y'all have adopted
I
his mindset.
I agree with you, but I also feel like at the same time, because of how their friendship ended, they
Mm.
decided to make each other's villains. Because
I think it's
I'm not
more
gonna
like
act like
rivals, though.
it. I mean, like rivals. Rival is better. Rival is better. Yeah, I think rival is better because I still see the parallel between Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Because at the time of their peak in their movements, when they were against each other, that's how it looked. You had
Mm.
communities within the Black community that were split between nonviolence and more active participation in how they revolted, not revolted, well, kind of
Yeah.
resisted the structure, resisted the system. So I still see the parallel there, which is why, like, I see both sides. Naturally, I'm over here like, oh, Professor X is so noble, but this show also kind of adjusted my mindset, which we'll get
Yeah.
into. It adjusted my mindset because I think both of them were so noble to a fault. They
Yeah.
both were so honorable to a fault.
Yeah.
Like they were kind of like extremes of this spectrum of being a
Mm-hmm.
mutant. And it's almost like how society has to always paint a good guy and a bad guy.
Yeah.
Professor X was just chosen to be the good guy, and Magneto was chosen to be the bad guy. Even how they played
And
them in
it's
the movies.
crazy because it's like, if you really think about it, it's like what have I actually done to you besides try to protect and save you? What have I done to you?
Well, I mean, if you
Like
look
for
at the
the
movies,
well,
depending on.
eventually I do something to you. Eventually I do something to all y'all. But
Hmm.
prior to that, because once y'all decided in y'all mind that I am your opposition because I am not doing what you, that's the only thing that y'all don't like. I haven't done anything. Cyclops, what have I done to you? But
Right.
if you be so bent out of shape. Anytime he see me at the train, you would have thought he's
He's such a
his
yes
dog.
man.
Like he's so bent out of shape.
Cyclops is such a yes man, and
And it's like, what have I even done to you?
I'm so glad you brought Cyclops up. 'Cause Cyclops is such, he's always like Loki has been one of my least favorites. Like he's always for me,
He's
he's like the
always been my
Derek
least
Shepherd.
favorite.
He's a Derek Shepherd of X-Men for me. Like, is he not? He's the Derek Shepherd of X-Men. Like, and now I'm gonna get you. Watch. So you just agreed he's the Derek Shepherd of X-Men. So what does that make Jean Grey?
Child, Meredith is she
Boom,
get on my
boom.
last nerve. Meredith got on my
But ain't Meredith
last
bad?
nerve.
Meredith bad though. Is she bad? Okay, so let's get into it because
She is.
one of the next things that for me was like a very interesting plot and storyline that I think it's also kind of polarizing, just like just like the Magneto Professor X thing, is you've got Jean Grey and Cyclops introduced in the season as Jean being pregnant. So Jean is pregnant and they're expecting a child and they're thinking, oh, well, since Magneto's going to be in charge, she's like, well, since Magneto's going to be in charge, maybe we can just like take a step back, have this baby,
I
start
know
our
what to do.
family, like we can go and do our own thing now. Like maybe that's why Professor X did this because it was in the will of Charles Xavier that Magneto take over everything.
Which is
And
also kind of funny to me because Child Scott was Mr. I am destined to be the leader.
I'm
And then
destined to do
kind of
this.
blink of an eye, it's like, well, let's just go be Little House on the Prairie, maybe. I don't know. I thought you was destined for this.
And it's so
You were
crazy
born for
because
this.
they go they go on a mission and they go on a mission and they come back and everything's kind of cool. Jean is about to have the baby. And I think that's again another thing that comes in with this that really kind of hits home the representation and the idea for any marginalized community, any marginalized person, any woman, any person who is not a straight white man should be able to see some, and even straight white men should be able to see some version and form of themselves in this because there's this moment, Jean's having the baby, all hell is breaking loose, and they go to the hospital, and the hospital realizes they're mutants, and the doctor's like, I'm not delivering your baby. And in order for them to have the baby deliver, one of the most genius moments in the show comes about where they're like, Rogue, steal that man's memory and do
Right.
he's like,
Lived
do the
inside of
procedure yourself. And she did. Rogue was like, period. And they
But
delivered that baby, but because of bigotry, again, we're seeing it even in a show. There were moments for me, and I don't know if you felt this, I feel like you did, but there were moments for me where watching it, it would get really real. Like, I'd be like, this is the animation, but I felt this. I know exactly what this person is going through. That reflects something that happened in my life last week. That happened to me today. Like that type of stuff even popped up in this animation, and
Especially
that's what made it so
half of
wonderful.
the season. Oh my god, the triggering of it all.
The triggering of it all, the climax of the season, like,
I was so
um,
emotionally spent by this.
but so invested at the same
Yes,
time.
so
It
invested in
was,
every
I
single
mean,
moment.
like, wow. So you've got Cyclops and Jean. They come home. They've got the baby. They had just wrapped up a mission. Everybody's at the crib. Everybody's so excited. Oh my
Except
gosh,
for
new
me.
baby.
I was not excited. I was
He was
the one
not excited
person
about the
who was
baby.
by humbugging just off the baby bump alone. No shade to the baby, just your parents.
Just so they're all chilling at the house, and then there's a knock on the door, and Morph answers the door, and there's another Jean Grey, and
Because
she's in
that's what
tattered
we
hospital.
all wanted.
That's
Was more G.
y'all, and you're gonna realize this as we continue this conversation, but D and I are on very different sides of the Jean Grey conversation. And I do feel like the show brought her a little bit more to my
The
side. She might
show,
be on
I
the
ain't gonna
fence
say
now.
all that.
I feel like she's on the fence now versus
I
not
ain't
on the
even
fence.
at the fence yet.
I think she's made it to the fence, y'all, and I don't think she wants to admit it because this is my relationship with Jean Grey and Storm on the show. They're literally on my phone.
I totally embody Storm.
Period.
I will be the
Absolutely.
Storm to your Gene, but I will never be a Gene.
I'm cool with that.
And
I'm
that's
cool with
okay.
that. I'm okay with that. Because for me, Jean Grey is one of my absolute favorite characters. And for those who know me well, I've always had this natural, spiritual, historical connection with the Phoenix. It's always been one of my
You are
favorite things to, I am the Phoenix, you know, like Phoenix J is my handle. Like that's what I go by. That is me. And I have a Phoenix tattooed on me. Won't do that again, but I have a Phoenix tattooed on me. And that's a whole nother story talking about the spiritual meaning of tattoos, but we'll get there another day. That's a whole nother conversation. But, Jean Grey has always been one of my favorite characters. I've just always felt that she's been played too weak because she's so powerful as a vessel for the Phoenix. She's
She's a
so
damsel
powerful,
in distress who can't
but she's
control her
always
power.
plays a damsel in distress. So damsel in distress moments happens perfectly. She pulls up at the crib and she's like, "Oh, help." And
Help
so
me.
they run some tests and they realize the woman who has stumbled into the mansion is the actual Jean Grey, and the woman who's been there is a clone of Jean Grey. So long story short with the clones, because we're going to get through this because there is some interesting conversation on the other side of this plot. Madeline is the name that the clone of Jean Grey takes, so that'll make this conversation a little bit easier. Cyclops and Madeline essentially have had this baby Nathan. And in their battle with Mr. Sinister, who's one of the big bads from the original show and from the comics, the baby has been infected with a virus. And the virus that has infected the baby requires that the baby go to the future to be taken care of. Now, there's a lot that happens in between, which is why y'all have to watch the show, because I feel there's this moment where Jean is on this hospital bed and she's like, "I gotta go rescue Scott. I gotta do something." And they're like, "Girl, your body, you can't go nowhere, your body." And she said, "I don't need my body." That was the moment for me when she's like, "I don't need my body to do what I gotta do," because she's a powerful telepath. And the battle that ensued in the mind of Jean Grey with Madeline Pryor, I still feel like was a great battle in the show. Like, cause Jean was giving her a run.
I'm a little bit team Madeline only because she
That's
didn't get a
okay.
fair run, man. She didn't get
That's
a fair run.
okay. That's
I
okay.
feel like Madeline, like, she could have been, if she wasn't like on the evil side of things, and you know what I'm saying, we could have worked with her. Like, she was cool. Like, she could have been all right. She didn't
I
get
don't
a
even
fair
feel like
shot.
Madeline was
When
evil.
she was brought into it, yeah, it was more like controlled by Sinister.
It
It
was
was more
control.
Sinister's
She was
doing.
controlled.
So I feel like if she had her own, well, it wouldn't be her mind, Jean. But if she could just be Madeline and like do what she do without Sinister controlling her, she would have been all right.
And she did. Well, okay, let's get to it because she did. She did for a second. So there's a moment where Madeline comes under this control of Sinister and they're fighting and everything, and the result of the fight is that Jean wins the fight against Madeline, incapacitating Sinister's hold on her. And so now that they've realized the baby's infected and has to be sent to the future, Madeline kind of programs him essentially with this last message of her psyche so that he knows He knows her voice. He knows that she only did what she had to protect him, and to save his life. And they send him into the future with Bishop. And this child goes on to be Cable, who we'll see throughout the show. Which, I mean, if you've read the comics, you know that it's Cable. If you know it's Cable. Cable is just their kid from a different, and they have kids in so many universes, so many versions of their kids. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. But they've always been OP. They've always been very positive kids. Like the kid, all right now, these kids be giving. Many of them have hosted the Phoenix. They be having the telepathy. They be having optic blast. They be doing all type of stuff. Next level, overpowered mutants, like legit.
The parents just so happen to be lame.
Cyclops is absolutely lame. I completely agree with you on that. What happens next?
Company she keeps.
What happens next is one of the most, I think, murky and polarizing and interesting tension moments of the show for me, because you've got the loss of a child essentially happening between Cyclops and Madeline, who is a clone of Jean. And at the same time, this is what complicates the matter, at least in my eyes, Madeline has all of Jean's memories, plus all that she's lived since she's been in Jean's place. Jean has experienced everything Madeline has experienced mentally while she's been in her place, and has all of her own memories from prior to Madeline being there. So they have all of the same memories. They have all of the same experiences, and even the two of them have a difficult time differentiating what are their memories and what are the other one's memories. So everybody's confused. Cyclops is like, who have I been loving the longest? But I love both of you. Like, at the same time, I can't help but love both of you, because one of you I've spent my life with and the other you have had a child with.
And essentially, in my mind, this has been the same person the entire time anyway. So to him,
exactly.
To him, no it's just one
there
person.
Was no other.
I love you because you never changed. You were just here the whole time.
And I think for me, this is where Dee and I begin to disagree on this issue, because there I completely agree. But this is where we begin to disagree, because there is, Jean and Scott have this, because she is a psychic, she's a telepath, they have this special link. Well, if Jean has that special link, so would Madeline. So when Madeline and Scott are having this conversation in this special link, and Jean happens to experience what is going on and realize what's going on, she flips out. And now I can agree with you to some extent that I do think it was somewhat insensitive. But it was also a misunderstanding, in the sense that I don't think neither. Madeline seemed to be more understanding because I think she's a clone. Because she's a clone. Her realizing she's the clone probably wasn't a great feeling either. But for Jean, it would feel like he's with another woman, even though that's her. She wouldn't be able to see him at his struggle because of her own host of the Phoenix frustration.
Here's the thing. The problem is that your main concern is that you feel like this is the other one. That's what you focused on right now. All of what's going on right now, and all your main focus is that you feel like he's with another woman, even though you was just with another man kissing on another man.
Let's be very clear,
because he loves to leave that out, y'all. He likes to just act like this is just
and I didn't even intentionally leave it out.
No.
I didn't even intentionally leave it out. But I just felt like it's such a non-moment, because she kisses him and he just be like, okay, hold up.
If that's a non-moment, then Scott and Madeline are definitely a non-moment. I disagree. They weren't even in the same room. It wasn't even real. It was in the head. And they just lost their child.
How was it not real?
Because it didn't happen in the physical realm.
So emotional affairs aren't a thing?
People have dreams all the time.
But a dream, he was not asleep. He was conscious.
You conscious-ish when you dream?
No, it's not the same. These two things are not the same.
Okay, so what's worse? Physically kissing someone on the physical plane who is not the person that you're with.
Okay.
Or mentally kissing someone in a moment of trauma and despair, because it was an emotional driven thing that you at this time had already been in a relationship with, because you didn't realize that they were a clone the entire time. This is two completely different things. Wolverine was never in the equation for you to even, it don't equate.
Wolverine was always in the equation. Wolverine is just like, they're low-key a throuple. Like, he's always been in the equation. So it's like, I
It's
think
why I don't like them.
because where you say, and I agree with you, but I will say that I think that they're both equally bad. Like, because
No.
I do only, and the only reason I say that is because with Cyclops now becoming aware that Madeline is not the Jean that he married,
But isn't she though?
she's not.
She's physically not, but she is.
She exactly
So
that,
this is
but
still
that
the same person.
it,
It's just
and
two
that's what
different
makes
bodies.
it that I think that's what makes it extremely murky is because she is still the same person. Like,
Yeah. It's
but they're
still weird.
experiencing after having this moment of for the two of them because I think that's where the most Cyclops has his own experience that is completely separate of the genes, you know? And I'm
Yeah.
not, I can't take anything away from him losing his child. I think everything that I think he handled the situation as best he could. Cyclops did. I'm going to say that. And I'm going to leave that over there. For me, the murkiness comes because with the two genes, it I see it for both of them. I see the frustration. I see the need to communicate with Cyclops. I see the any type of I'm feeling like that's why Madeline had to leave is because she is in love with Cyclops because she
And
has
that's
Jean's memories. They're the same
but
person.
she's Jean. But that's the thing, and it's like I feel like because it seems like it's immensely, but she is Jean. She has Jean's
Hmm.
entire DNA makeup. It's just in another physical body. So essentially, this is the same person. You know
At
what I
the
mean?
same time, though, the main
Because if we're
difference because there
saying
is a
that, we're going to
difference.
say if it wasn't for the baby is the only thing that really separates
There's
them.
two things that separate them, and
What's that?
it comes later in the show. The baby is what makes Madeline Madeline. The Phoenix
Yeah,
is what makes Jean Jean.
you're right. You're right.
Because
You're right.
that's the differentiation.
You're right.
Madeline was
Because the
never the
Phoenix ain't
Phoenix.
got nothing to do with what we be
Not
doing
at all. But that's what I'm saying.
around
Like
here.
that is the main difference. And even the
Essentially,
baby,
it's the same person. You know what I'm saying?
essentially. And that's what I think makes it like it's
Especially
one of
because
those
they
things.
share a stream of consciousness. It's not even like you had experiences. We are sharing a stream of
Hmm.
consciousness. So we are essentially the same person. It's like putting your part of your brain in another body almost.
Up until the freedom from Sinister, because
Yeah.
when she was freed from Sinister, that's when Madeline kind of became her own being, essentially. That's why she took the new name, is because she kind of became, at that point, she's forming her own path. She's making her own
And I
decisions.
feel like even that was forced because it's like now she's aware that she's not.
Exactly.
So
That's why
she
I'm
has
saying
to create her own.
it's
You know what I'm
such murky
saying?
waters. Like, I
Yeah,
just feel
and that's
like
why Jean should have shut up. The moral of
I'm
that
just gonna
story.
nod. I'm gonna nod because I think that our other homegirl also had a lot of like
Yeah,
difficulty and struggle to deal with herself.
you
And
talk
for
about
me,
real.
that was come on now, let's talk about the goddess. Because even when Magneto takes over the team and he does his first debriefing and he's talking to everybody, he shades that whole team. Everybody gets shaded down except one person. And the one person he had to nod himself and come into agreement and understanding with was Storm.
Period.
He was like, I know you as the goddess. You are the goddess. You gotta,
Yeah,
one
like
omega to another. He was like one omega to another. Good
I
morning.
see you.
Like I see you, respect,
Period. I love it.
and Storm has, again, another one who's always been one of my favorite characters because of the power of this,
Mhm.
like the connection to nature, but the true power of this woman. Like, and then
Yes.
she was black. She was the only black X-Men for a
Mhm.
long time. So it was, how could we not connect with Storm?
And still was shown so powerful.
So powerful when she took over the Morlock realm and she had to fight her fears. But Storm
Hmm.
is another character who historically they've always played her very weak. They've
Yeah.
always played her down and not allowed her, like they've had story arcs and storylines where she's been shown to be a goddess or she's saved the day, so to speak. But they were few and far between as much as they were for like a Wolverine or a Cyclops or a Professor
And that's
X.
why it made me so mad when my girl reached out and touched nothing.
That So in one of the episodes,
Oh,
essentially Storm protects Magneto from an attack. And he would have been attacked by essentially like mutant neutralizing stuff. And when it struck her, she lost her powers. Oh my goodness. You
that's
want to talk
like the
about pissed off?
child.
Finish that episode so bad.
wanted
I
to
have to
fight,
sip some more of that because
was
I was so upset.
windmilling. Like, how dare you? The
I was so
disrespect.
angry. The disrespect, and that's what I said. I
After
was like, the
you made me wait
disrespect.
decades, and this is how
And
we're
this is what we get.
starting out. This is how we're coming out the gate.
Because this is what episode 2, episode 3, this is like beginning of the show.
We're just getting our feet wet
And
and
we lose
gone.
Storm.
Gone.
It was infuriating, and at the same time, the story arc as it plays out with Storm is one of those I think any person, especially those of us spiritually attuned who deal with maybe mental health illnesses or mental episodes, we're waving, we're talking about
Yeah.
there's so many things
I
out of our
don't
control.
know.
Like there's so many things out of our control emotionally where sometimes we are the reason that we lose our abilities. So
Because
we're
we
going to come back.
forget
We're
who
going to
we are.
circle back around. We forget who we are. We're going to circle back around to that. But I think it was wonderful because also at the same time, prior to her losing her powers, she'd had a conversation with Jean where they were discussing the hatred that mutants experience. And, it was like, have you ever thought about being a human? And she's like, oh, I've been dosed a time or two before. Essentially, I couldn't imagine being me, but, I'd like to be able to walk and just exist and not be stared at and not be treated crazy. That kind of is a fantasy. Like it is what it is. It's just not
Can't
existence.
imagine being a human. It sounds so ghetto.
So ghetto.
Can't relate.
But even like Storm is one character that I think they got right this season, and another character I feel like they got right. And I heard her referred to as a gateway character, which made sense because I'd never considered her that before. But she was definitely that. She was a character that they would center stories around, and they centered the X-Men animated series around this character to introduce a younger and new audience to X-Men. And they did it with this show with Sunspot. Sunspot was our gateway character this time, but they're the one who kind of comes in and takes a primary role, has a story built around them so that a new audience is introduced to a character that maybe typically wouldn't get as much attention. And at the same time, they're kind of bringing some freshness to it. And that was Jubilee. Jubilee was the gateway for X-Men, the animated series.
And let's talk about too how she did not look young enough in the first one, but she looks young enough now.
And I'm gonna give you a comparison. You've seen Grease, right?
Yes.
She was Rizzo. She was, how Rizzo did not look like that's a grown woman. She was Rizzo. Like that's how she looked originally, and they got her right. I feel like she also looked more Asian American.
She did.
So she looked like that mix of culture that she was supposed to originally look. That I feel like at first she looked white.
But her fireworks was still pissing me off.
It's such a unique power set. I do think that they showed more levels to it. They showed more levels to it this time.
Moment and then, like, bro, she got.
What's that? What's the firework where you light it and it's just like they just shoot out the little oh my gosh, I'm thinking of it right now. Roman candle.
Oh yeah.
Or sparkler. That's essentially what Jubilee be doing.
A little sparkler.
But one episode that I thought was very clever was the Motendo half of Motendo and Life Death. Yeah. Very clever. Because they're gamers. This was also during a time, and Jubilee was a great character. Because in the 90s, arcade culture was huge. Huge in the 90s. And they were arcade players. That's actually, I think they saved her at an arcade. Like when they first, she was in the mall at the arcade when Jubilee's character was introduced in the first episode of X-Men animated series. And having her and Sunspot have this gaming mode where they get stuck in this game by Crazy Mojo again. And his Mojo verse and it was a really wonderful take on gaming and the idea of nostalgic gaming, but also having these mutants have to use their powers and save themselves and doing the whole parallel universes and stuff.
That moment of escapism too, because it's like even us as people, it's like it's so. Because if you think about her, she's a mutant. She has to deal with the chaos of the world every day,
Beautiful
and it's
point.
like this is a moment for her to escape, and that's why I think she had that moment with her older self of like, you can't just stay in here.
You can't stay here.
Do this, okay? You got to go out. You got to live. But it's so easy to kind of get caught up in your safe spaces and just want to stay there. Because if I could just sit and just watch anime and like play video games, I would.
What?
I'm with you, Jubilee.
Same.
Like, let's just
That's
stay
the life.
here, because when you
That
go
is the
out that door,
life. Ghetto. I don't know if you ever
we
heard the
really say
song. I don't know if you right. We're gonna get there. I don't know if you've ever heard the song "Earth Is Ghetto" by Aaliyah Sheffield.
I
You
think I
should hear
have.
it.
I think I have.
So good, so good. But literally, that's what that made me think of. But they finally gave Jubilee like some spotlight, and they allowed because I feel like her powers made more sense in the video game than it
Yeah.
did in real life, and that was wonderful to give her some context where it makes sense. We do get to see her fight a little bit more in the show where she does get to show off her skills, but I do think having that moment with that future version of herself, Abscissa or whatever she was called, where she was like, oh my gosh, we can do that. And she's like, we can do so much more. I feel like that was the teaser that we
Yes,
needed
and
to
I'm
hear.
like, girl, I am ready for the more.
I'm ready
Because
for the so much
if
more.
you sparkler me one more time,
I'm so sick of the Roman candle people in death. Roman
like
candling
we got
people to
you ready
death.
to pop
Like,
champagne. Like, what are we doing?
so, in that same episode, we get the continuation of where Storm is gone. And I thought that was interesting because what they did with X-Men 97 is the tone. The tone of the show
Yeah.
was so spot on every single episode. And we get the introduction of Forge, who is, I don't know what I was doing there to get a thumbs up, but we appreciate it. You know, they agreed. The tone was on.
Period. Thank
One
you
thumb
for
up
the
to the tone,
confirmation.
you know? So we get the introduction of Forge and Forge's power. Not as many people are familiar with Forge because he's not like Wolverine or nothing that we've seen a whole lot of movies and roles about. But Forge he's essentially the type of mutant who, if he thinks up a piece of technology, he can create it. If he can think it up, he can create it. And so we come to find out that as they're building this relationship, he's telling her, hey, he meets her in a bar, he sees her, he says, hey, I know who you are, I know what you're capable of, and I can help you get your powers back. And she's intrigued because that monologue
Yeah, I
after
wanted
she
to
lost her
smack him.
powers. Hmm?
Like, just sitting here, I'm just like, I want to mush him. Like, because when you think about it now, it's like, get out of my face.
Get out of my face with that
I
mess.
can help you. I bet you can.
I bet you can. But when that monologue that she had when she lost her powers, I'm not gonna go through it. I really want y'all to see it.
It broke my
Go
heart.
back. I literally had a tear for Storm, like a
It broke
real
my heart.
deal. I was so
'Cause in
sad
my
in that
mind,
moment
like, if
and
I had
mad.
powers, I would be somewhere with like Storm and Poison Ivy, like had a baby, like that
Yeah,
would be me.
very
And
naturey.
so it's just like, girl, I cannot imagine, like, girl, you reach it. And when she reached out, and there was
Reached
just,
out.
and then they had the montage. I was just like,
It was
okay,
that was tough.
take apart. I could not. Like, just imagine a world without nature. This place already
And not being able to
sucks.
connect with it. It was.
And then
I
there's no
mean,
nature. You can't feel the breeze.
the water, none of it. Like she goes with Forge and they end up in like this ranch in the middle of the desert and they're in love. They're just doing a little romance couple thing and he's tinkering on tools and realizes that he has to tell her the truth. And the truth is he is responsible for some of the technology that led to the weapon that destroyed her powers, her abilities, that removed them from her, that neutralized them, if you will. And I could not imagine still being in that house, windmilling, molly wop, doo wop, to pop, pop, pop,
Because
all
how
through that
dare
ranch.
you sit up here and come to me like you just feel for me, you finna save me, you just finna help me out. Then you let me catch feelings. And you don't play with my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I am a water baby. You don't play with our feelings. Okay? Because we
And
are
y'all be having
tied to
all
them
the
things.
feelings.
Okay? All
Same
the
though.
feelings.
Same though. I'm a fire, and you know we are. Yeah.
Listen, like,
Y'all play with the feelings now.
And then you gonna drop this bomb on me?
Mm-hmm.
You are the reason that I
The
can't
disrespect.
feel the breeze.
The disrespect.
Windmilling.
But I also think, and I think we'll just go ahead and talk about the whole life death because it's life death part 1 and 2. There's 2 parts to it, and it's split throughout different halves of the season. But it was also for me like the realization, she begins to realize that she's having a battle with a demonic entity, demonic bird entity that is essentially despair. And it is recognizing that she has basically lost hope and faith in herself. She's forgotten who she is. She is unable to tap back into her power set because she doesn't believe she's worthy of it. And it's watching her battle despair, because when despair came out and bit Forge and slung him across that room.
Which I was here for that. I ain't gonna lie, I was here for that.
I slick like Forge though. Not because of that, after the fact, but I like his ability. I think he's always been like just one of those kind of cool.
Your ability is cute. You just misused it, and this is why
He did misuse it. He was kind of a mercenary, like a gun for hire at the time, but that doesn't excuse it. He was in the wrong. Because essentially, like, it's, and you know what it makes me think of? This is actually, I'm glad this thought came back to me when crack was introduced to the Black community in the 80s. I know, pivot, right?
I need to laugh.
Come on, segue.
It's a serious topic. I'm so sorry that I laughed, y'all. It's uncontrollable.
I just dropped that one on you. I really did. But no, like, when crack was introduced into the Black community, and there were so many of the drug dealers that were Black, that's kind of like what the parallel was for me. Because even though he was doing it for himself, making his own money, taking care of his own, it's like you're hurting your community. You're creating things that are hurting your community in particular, and you're using your skill set for evil. Like, I remember someone, and it's a common churchy trope when they talk about, well, if those kids out there who was running them drug operations were running a business, imagine how much, blah, 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 blah. But legit.
Like society would have let them.
Right, like society would have let them. But legit, like, that was the reflection I saw in Forge, is like, you use your skill set that essentially they weaponized against your people. Like, they could legit, essentially, and maybe he had a failsafe in it that the weapon could never be used against him, but it's like, essentially, you've created a weapon that could wipe out your race. The whole mutant race could be wiped out because of your contributions. So, watching Storm battle despair and return to herself was probably one of the biggest smiles I cracked in the show, and I was smiling all show long. So when she flew around,
resonates to that, and it's kind of, it made me think about how, like, you know how when people constantly be going through stuff, they just be like, "Oh, it's the devil," or "Oh, these demons," and it's like we kind of conjure up that because we're speaking that, we're believing that, we're feeling that, so we conjure it up, kind of how like she conjured up the despair, like she was in that. She was literally wallowing in that, and she couldn't find herself, and she created this, you know what I mean?
This entity, yeah,
that she essentially had to battle against.
Had to battle herself, and it was an internal battle. It was not a physical battle in the physical realm. It was an internal battle.
And it's like, I feel like so many people have that moment. Anybody who made it out of anything has had that moment where you had to, like, or even you've been blessed enough to have people around you who will, like, shake you back and be like, remind you of who you are. And like, okay, you can do, because some people get lost in that and they don't get out of that.
They don't bounce back. Two things. One quick trivia thing is, for those who don't know, the actress who plays the voice of Storm also plays the voice of Despair. And that's really interesting because it connects back to that point that it was you all along. It was all within you. Originally, you lost faith in yourself. You lost sight of who you are, and that's why you lost your abilities. Beautiful moment there. But even with Storm going through that journey, and we get to see the 40-inch bust down?
Yeah, she got that 40-inch
bust down.
She said, "Oh, wait, I am her."
Complete evolution back into herself, and we get to see one of the truly best Storm costumes they've had throughout the comic runs is the one that she wears when she comes back with her powers.
On top of that building, I said, "You better enter the scene." I know that's right. That is an entrance. I want to walk into every room like that. Everywhere I go, I just want to pop in like that.
Period. It was beautiful. Even when she, like, the full, and it was like this moment, and I don't know. I was kind of laughing when Storm got her powers back, I began to laugh because I'm like, Forge in there dying of this poison, girl, and you was flying with the horses
And
and
I
looking
was
at your
too.
reflection,
40
flipping your
inch
hair, and
winning the
I was
moon.
just so tickled because it was she remembered who she was. Um,
And he needed to
so
live in that moment for a little longer.
So what we're gonna do, y'all, is this is getting really juicy and really good. We are going to we're gonna wrap this up right here, and we're gonna do a part two. We're gonna do a part two on this because the climax of the show is yet to come. We got to talk about Genosha,
We ain't
y'all.
even got into
We
the
got to
juice
talk
of the
about
juice.
Genosha. We just done set the
This
table.
is
We done
just
set the
the
scene
chaos they put us through before we got.
before we got to the real chaos. So we thank y'all for tuning into this episode where we again are doing 50 Lemon reviews, y'all, and we'll see y'all in just a second with part two.